Hey guys, welcome to another Ishaan S Show Daily. We are on with some breaking news that has just come out of the Republican primary, which is that Chris Christie is dropping out of the GOP primary race. This is news that caught a lot of people by surprise. I'll tell you, I did not see this coming, and I have my finger on the pulse of this primary going on all the time. I'm getting the updates. I'm getting stuff from on the ground, and it's surprising. It's surprising, and I didn't expect this to happen. Obviously, and it's not that people didn't expect Chris Christie to drop out. That was inevitable in this race. He wasn't polling very high. It's just the decision to do it when he did. That's what caught everybody by surprise. I've been watching CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC coverage, and even the people there are surprised with what is going on right now. Because Chris Christie was not the type to actually be willing to drop out. In fact, he was very defiant about staying in the primary race through the convention in July. That was how far ahead he was thinking. I mean, I guess maybe not as seriously anymore, but he was thinking of dropping out of this race, or he wasn't thinking of dropping out of this race until today, when it was reported from sources within the Christie campaign that he would be making an announcement at 5 p.m., a major announcement. This was supposed to be for a previously scheduled New Hampshire event. So what does it mean that Christie's dropped out? Well, first I want to talk about the thinking behind his decision. So many people are quick to think that if we were to look at previous instances of where exactly this race lied, he did not matter a lot in a lot of states. Like if we look for Iowa specifically, Iowa's the caucus that we're having on Monday, and we talked about this. We talked about this a while ago, I think on Monday, about the race in Iowa. He was not really that impactful. He was polling at just 3%. It wasn't much. Where he actually matters, where Christie actually matters, is in New Hampshire, because New Hampshire is where Christie had put all his money. Just like how Ron DeSantis had put all his money in Iowa, Chris Christie had put every ounce of resource he had into New Hampshire. Because in New Hampshire, as I've said before, they have a primary in which they have an open primary in which Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, basically anyone can vote in that primary, in that Republican primary. And generally, Chris Christie was appealing to the moderate voters and Democrat voters and independent voters that were coming in to the Republican primary to participate there. So Chris Christie dropping out of this race is going to have a huge impact on the New Hampshire ballot, because in New Hampshire, Nikki Haley is polling at 33% to Donald Trump's 37%. If we go with a more recent poll that came out of New Hampshire, that came out from CNN, we'd see that it's 39 to 32%. But in general, Chris Christie is pulling up there. He has a huge swath of support. A swath of support that Haley is really going to be happy to hear. If anyone is getting excited by this news, it's Nikki Haley. Obviously, none of these candidates are polling as high as Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the Goliath in all of this, and they are all combined the David. But it's really not a easy match for Haley to make it through. I think somebody on CNN I was watching put it very well, that Christie dropping out is not going to be something that was needed for Haley to win, but it was a necessary event that follows through in the process of Nikki Haley potentially beating Donald Trump. But why does it matter that this is happening? Well, in New Hampshire, the delegates that they have 22 delegates, with Chris Christie now out of the race officially. I guess I should formally remove him, I guess, from my list. But with Chris Christie now out of the race, the number of delegates up for grabs, this is going to benefit Nikki Haley a lot. Who are Christie voters? Chris Christie voters are anti-Trump Republicans. These are Republicans that do not want Donald Trump. What Nikki Haley is now this is the field that Nikki Haley has now started to appeal to and has made much bigger efforts to get towards anti-Trump Republicans. She's not outwardly criticized Donald Trump a lot. She is mostly just saying very vague, non-answer type of things whenever she's asked to challenge Donald Trump. She's not giving anybody a definitive answer about anything, but she is going far enough and she is taking policy stances to the left enough that moderate voters, independent voters, and general non-Trump Republican voters who tend to be more towards the middle are appreciating Haley and are supporting and backing her. With Chris Christie, who has also been taking a swath of that support, he also they are competing for that same lane. And there's a theory in politics, in primary politics specifically, that in a primary election, you are not competing against all the candidates. You are competing in your lane. First, you compete in the moderate lane, you compete in the center of your party or center of your side lane, and then the extreme end of your lane. And as you work your way up, then you start competing with other factions. And that's the thing that's been going on here. But with Chris Christie out of the way, the moderate independent wing of the Republican Party, in this primary at least, can consolidate behind Nikki Haley. And the word consolidate is really important because that's the word that we've been saying for months. Can somebody consolidate support against Donald Trump? Now, if you asked me on a national level, it's not very probable that anyone are partaking Donald Trump on a national level, because might I remind everybody that Trump is on average at around 62%, 11% for Haley, 11% for DeSantis. So Trump is beating people by 51 points. He's not necessarily going to be making a huge loss because of Chris Christie dropping out. Not that any Christie supporter was backing him in the first place, but what matters from this is New Hampshire. Because in New Hampshire, if Nikki Haley can somehow get those supporters, and about 60%, if we look at the CNN poll that came out yesterday, about 60% of Chris Christie supporters see Nikki Haley as their second choice. And if you look at that 55%, that's why, because she appeals to moderate voters with 55%. Christie's in second place, a very distant second place, but in a second place nonetheless with 26%. So if Haley can consolidate at least some Christie support, which is probable, that is support that can then go to Nikki Haley and can fuel this gap and this deficit that we're seeing right now. If we look at the CNN poll, which is probably a better measure, it may not be the best, but it is a better measure of where this race is, and that CNN poll has her trailing 7 points. If we just look in that poll alone, 12%, if 7%, 7.2% of these people go to Nikki Haley, we can't assume that all 12 will go to her, but if we can assume that 7.2%, because that's 60% of 12, go to Nikki Haley, that is enough to overtake Donald Trump. Of course, maybe there's a few supporters of Chris Christie's that may not turn out for Donald Trump, or actually may not turn out to vote at all, or may, for whatever reason, back Donald Trump. That may not be enough to close that gap. Haley is perfectly capable of overtaking Trump now that Christie's out. And I think in yesterday's video, I was even talking about this, that he was actually mulling to leaving the race, and that this would be helpful for Haley to close the gap. But anything that comes within neck to Donald Trump, 1%, 2% margins we're talking about, which is achievable now for the record, that can be detrimental to Donald Trump. And it shows in the way he's campaigning, because he's been increasing attacks on Nikki Haley in New Hampshire because he sees her as a threat. She is starting to edge up closer and closer. Even in Iowa, we were talking about this yesterday in Iowa. She is now the second place candidate in Iowa. That shows that Nikki Haley is making ground, and a better than expected performance in Iowa is enough to propel her into New Hampshire. A decent performance in New Hampshire, or even winning New Hampshire, ? could be enough to catapult her and turn out voters and potentially consolidate more of those Christie supporters who really don't feel motivated to turn out. Now, are we going to see a Christie endorsement for Haley? I don't think so. Not yet anyway. As he was dropping out, a hot mic incident. So this was right before he was about to speak at that event I was talking about. There was a hot mic incident where Christie was a hot mic incident. Basically, the microphone was recording, even though he wasn't speaking. He was getting set up or something backstage. So it picked up on what he was saying. But basically what he said was, quote, "She is smoked." Now, there's not a lot of context as to what she was talking about, but basically he was saying that Haley is smoked. And then when talking to somebody, we don't know who, he was saying that Nikki Haley is trailing Trump by 20 points in New Hampshire and Iowa, and a lot of things that he was just saying that really didn't convey the confidence. And that's the biggest problem for Christie, which is that he has always thought that Haley is not necessarily running for president to run against him or to run against Trump, but more like she's running for president to perhaps appeal to Trump enough to become his VP or steal enough support to warrant becoming his VP. Which is why, and he even in the end of his performance, or even at the end, right at the very end, when he was talking at his event, he basically was saying that he did not have a lot of faith in endorsing Haley. And in these last few days of his campaign, he was talking about the possibility of people, and he was getting asked this question a lot, the possibility of dropping out of the race and endorsing Haley. And he'd always say, I'm not going to endorse Haley because I don't think that she's running for president. She's running for vice president. And the thing with Chris Christie is that he lives with some sort of guilt. He has this feeling of guilt because he was one of Trump's earliest backers in 2016. I think in 2016, when he dropped out, he endorsed Trump within like 2 weeks, and I think he was the first challenger. He holds a lot of guilt in the way he's described it for supporting Trump. And in these last few days with ads that were coming out, it was showing he was talking about that guilt. And I think that's what he's avoiding with not endorsing Haley, that he doesn't want to back a candidate that may very well in the end just end up being on Trump's ticket. He does not want to take that sort of risk. So I think he is going to wait. He is going to wait for somebody to endorse, somebody he feels that he can back. And more than likely, given the field that we have, he doesn't get well along with Vivek Ramaswamy. Ron DeSantis is not that appealing of a candidate. And actually, in that hot mic moment, one of the people talking to Christie said that they expect Ron DeSantis to drop out by Iowa. So I don't think there's a lot of confidence in DeSantis getting an endorsement. Trump will not get an endorsement from Chris Christie. If anything, I would imagine Christie endorsing Biden over Trump, because his whole sole purpose of running in this race has been to just stop Donald Trump, right? So Donald Trump's not getting that endorsement. I don't know what Asa Hutchinson is still doing in this race. I mean, people like Chris Christie are dropping out. Maybe it's time for him to think about it. So it is Nikki Haley that's going to get that endorsement. Ultimately, if somebody's getting the endorsement, and she may need it, she may not need it. I think the only case where she might need it is the number of supporters that Christie may have who may not turn out to vote in the New Hampshire primary because they just don't feel like supporting Haley. But that's where an endorsement may come, but I don't think that endorsement's coming until New Hampshire, after New Hampshire. So we'll see. We'll see how this turns out. But this is some breaking news that has just come out. As soon as I heard about it, I started trying to prep stuff up to post about it. But we'll be keeping an eye on Chris Christie. He is definitely not irrelevant yet. He still has some time before he goes into irrelevance, but we're going to keep an eye out for what this has and the implications, because I'm going to be watching closely all the numbers that are going to be rolling around. And I'm going to be watching the debate that's going to be in an hour and a half now. And I want to see how the candidates respond on the stage. We'll see how things go. But that's what we have for today's Ishaan S Show Daily. Thank you so much for joining us. Follow us on our social medias. Thank you so much for making my Senate episode do so well. It's been doing really well right now. And continue to do what you do. And we'll see you all for the next video. Thank you so much.